Hello, students. Today we're going to work on a topic called factoring. Factoring is an inverse operation of multiplying. So last set of notes we worked on multiplying. Today we're going to essentially start off with the answer to the multiplication question and try to come up with the factors or the multipliers. What would multiply to give you this final answer? So as you look at a problem, I want you to think about what would be the greatest number and the greatest variable power that would divide into each term. And that's what I've got marked for you as always checking for common factors first. So on our first problem, I have 27x to the third minus 63x. So when we factor it, we want to take it back to having parentheses. Right now it doesn't have parentheses. We want to take it back to having them. So I'm going to show that I'm going to divide each term by making it look like a fraction. I'm thinking to myself, what is a number that will divide into both 27 and 63? And I want to go with the largest number that that would do that. And 9 will do that. So 9 is the largest number that will divide into both of those. You may need to get a calculator and keep checking things until you find something that works. You do need to get the largest amount. And then for the x, one of them just has an x to the first power. So that's going to be the largest variable power that would divide evenly into both. So once I know what I'm dividing by, the power or the divisor, what I divided by, will be written first, and then I will start a parentheses. Now, inside the parentheses, I'm going to put the answer to my division. So 27 divided by 9 is 3. And then my x, I had x to the third. I'm dividing it by x. So subtracting those exponents, I would have x to the second. And then I have a negative 63 divided by 9. That's going to be a negative 7. And then my x's will cancel out. Or if you think about subtracting the exponents, 1 minus 1 gives me a 0 for that exponent. So the x's have canceled and I'm out of terms. And so I'll close my parentheses. And this is what we call factored form. You always want to check inside your parentheses to make sure that you found the largest number. If you found the largest number, then you won't be able to divide by anything other than 1 inside your parentheses. So that means your answer is simplified. We'll look at our second problem. Works the same if you have 3 terms. You just have to think what will divide evenly into all 3 terms. So always look at your smallest number. Check that out first. So will 4 divide into both 24 and 40? And yes, it will. So 4 is our number. Then for your variables, you want to choose a variable that would be in all of the factors. So in this one, it has to be in all 3 factors. And it needs to be the lowest of the exponents that you have available. So I have an x to the third, an x to the fifth, and an x to the third. So I would have to use x to the third power, which is a factor of all 3 terms. And then I would have to look at my y's. I have y to the fifth, y to the second, and y to the second. So I can factor out, I can divide out a y to the second power from all 3 terms. I couldn't use a higher exponent because it wouldn't divide out evenly on my other terms. So the factor that I'm dividing by gets written first. So 4x to the third, y to the second. Then we start a parentheses, And now inside the parentheses, you do the dividing and put your answer. So 24 divided by 4 is 6. My x's cancel. I have x to the third over x to the third. The exponents subtract to give me 0. The x's are gone. I do have y. I have the fifth power over the second power, so I'll subtract exponents and get y to the third power. Okay, I'm going to do my next term. Negative 40 divided by 4 is negative 10. My x's, I have a 5 exponent minus a 3 exponent. That's x to the second power. And then for my y's, I have y to the second divided by y to the second. When I subtract those exponents, I get a 0. The y's are gone. Finally, I have negative 4 divided by positive 4. And don't be fooled by that. That's negative 1. Negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. But for my exponents, x to the third divided by x to the third, those cancel. Y to the second divided by y to the second, those cancel. Those give me 0 exponents. And so I no longer need to write the x and the y. I'll close my parentheses. I'll double check to make sure that I could not divide evenly into anything in the parentheses. So I have a 6, a 10, and a 1. I can't divide all three of them by anything other than a 1. And so I have factored it to simplest form. So those are a couple examples of problems that just have what we call common factors. Now, in this video lesson, we're going to look at 2 other types of factoring that are based on this idea of having common factors. And the first method we're going to look at is when we have an expression that has 4 terms, but we're not able to take out the same, we're not able to divide out the same value from all 4 terms. When that's the case, we're going to do grouping. So as I move on to that section, if there are 4 terms, we're going to try to factor by grouping. And if you recognize it and you can take out a common factor first, you can do so. Sometimes people don't recognize it, and I'll show you that as we go along. So I'm going to look at problem 3. I have x to the third plus 5x to the second minus 2x minus 10. I should think to see, is there any number other than 1 or a variable that would divide into each one of these terms, into each one? And no, there is not. So since I have 1, 2, 3, 4, I have 4 terms, I'm going to draw, I would call it a cut line. So I'm going to separate 2 terms and 2 terms. So I have x to the third plus 5x to the second, and then I have negative 2x minus 10. And now I'm going to think about just my first 2 and my last 2. So I'm going to divide by as big of a number. Well, my number, I can't divide by anything but 1. I'm not going to write the 1. And then I'm going to look at my variable, and I can divide by an x with the lower power. So x to the second power. So just like we did in our first 2 problems, I'll write that x to the second and then start a parentheses and do the dividing. So x to the third divided by x to the second is x to the first power plus. And then my x to the seconds will cancel, but I will still have a 5 from that term. So now I've done my first division. Now I'm going to move to my second 2 terms, and I have to think about what can I divide by. Now I have a hint because I know an answer that I want to get. I want to get an answer in a parentheses of x plus 5. So I can use that, especially with my 10, to think about what can I divide by. And I have to be careful about my sign. If this sign is a negative, then I want to divide by a negative number, and -2 would be the number that would divide into both -2x and -10. So I'll write my -2 and then start my parentheses, just like I did in my previous two problems. So my -2's cancel, but I have an x. Or you could think of it, -2 divided by -2 is a 1. I'm just not going to write the 1 in front of the x. And then -10 divided by -2 is a +5. And what you're going to find out is that our two parentheses, these two parentheses right here, if we're doing this method properly, are always going to match. And that matching parentheses is going to be one of the factors in our final answer. And then I like to show it that I've canceled out that matching factor so that I can see I have one more factor to have in my final answer, and it's what I have not marked out. What I have not marked out is the x to the second and the -2. And remember, I told you that we were taking something that did not have parentheses in it. So the start of our problem did not have parentheses. But at the end of the problem, we do have parentheses. If you'll remember from multiplying, whenever we multiplied a binomial, a parentheses by a binomial, other parentheses, we ended up getting 4 terms. So if we were to take x times x to the second, we would get x to the third. If we were to take x times -2, we would get a -2x term. If we were to take 5 times x squared, we would get a 5x squared. And if we were to take 5 times -2, we would get a 10. So we have just found what multiplies to give us the expression that we started off with in the beginning. So that's what it means to factor. And these problems are all going to end up with 2 parentheses. That's what your goal is. All right, so let's take a look at your next one. Now, I had told you to always remember to take out a greatest common factor first. It's been my experience that many students do not recognize that. So I'm going to start this problem by not recognizing that I could take out a common factor and show you how you can discover that you forgot that and how to fix it. So I have 4 terms. I'm going to draw a cut line. Notice that I draw it after my second term, before the operation, so before the plus or the minus sign. All right, I'm going to look to see what is the greatest number and variable power that I could divide by. Well, I'm going to check 3. Can they both divide by 3? Yes. So we'll divide by 3. And then of my variables, can they both divide by C? And once again, yes, they can. Now, can they both divide by D? No, they cannot. My second term does not have a D in it, so I would not be able to divide by a D. Okay, so I'll write my 3C, start a parentheses, and inside the parentheses, do my dividing. So 6 divided by 3 is 2. My C's will cancel. I'll get a 0 exponent, so they cancel. I do still have a D. So 2D, and then minus. Now, 3 divided by 3. Yes, it cancels, but you must do numerical division. So 3 divided by 3 is a 1. The c's cancel. I get a 0 exponent. And so I have 2d minus 1. All right, so now I'm going to divide my last two terms. Now I have to divide by the biggest number that I can. So always try taking your smaller of your two numbers and see if it works. So will 24 and 12 both divide by 12? And they will. So we'll divide each term by 12. And they both do not have a D in it, so I cannot use a D. This is a plus sign, so I have a positive 12 that I'm dividing by. And then let's check out what we get. So 24 divided by 12 is 2, and I have this D. And then negative 12 divided by 12 is negative 1. Now notice that I got that 2D minus 1 again. So if you feel confident that you have that first division right, you could go ahead and fill in the 2D minus 1 and then just figure out what it is that you have to divide by. So there are some shortcuts to thinking about this, not to doing it, but to thinking about it. So your common factor is the 2D minus 1. That's going to be one of your factors in your final answer. Now, that one's gone. I'm going to mark it out. And then my other factor is what I did not mark out. Well, what I did not mark out was 3c and the plus 12. Now, remember that I told you should always check to see in your parentheses. Can you divide by anything other than 1? Well, my 2d minus 1 is finished. I can't divide by anything. However, my 3c plus 12, I can divide both of those numbers by 3. So that means that at the beginning, I could have factored out, I could have divided out a 3 at the very beginning, but I chose not to. It's okay. You just have to think about it at the end. So I thought about it at the end. My final answer, I have to put the 3 that I divided by on the outside. And it doesn't matter then what order you put your parentheses in. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 2d minus 1 next. And then my last parentheses is the one that I get after I divide by my 3. So 3c divided by 3 will just give me c plus, and then 12 divided by 3 will give me 4. And so that would be my final answer. You must have that 3 on the outside. All right, so that's what we do when we have 4 terms. It's called factoring by grouping. We will turn your paper over and work on what we do when we only have 3 terms. So when we have 3 terms, there's a process that we call splitting the middle. And splitting the middle is a method that you're going to use to take a 3-term problem and turn it into a 4-term problem so that we can do the method that we had on the previous side. I'm going to start off by introducing you to a little bit new idea. We have x squared plus 4x plus 3 as our first problem. We're going to consider the number or the coefficient in front of the x squared and call it a. Well, all of these eventually are going to have a 1 in front of the x squared that's not being written. So 1x squared, the a is a 1. The b is the number in front of the x. For this problem, it's a 4. The c is the constant, the number that does not have a variable. For this problem, it's 3. For all of these problems, you're going to be provided with a chart. We're going to use this chart to help us figure out what to split our middle number up into. Our middle number, we need to split it into 2, but it's not necessarily split in half. We have to use a little bit different method. So we're going to look at what multiplies to the a term times the c term. So a times c in this problem, 1 times 3 is 3. And then we're going to look at what adds to the b term. The b in this problem is 4. Well, we're going to make a list of numbers that multiply to 3. And fortunately, that list is not very long. Only 1 and 3 multiply to 3. And fortunately, 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 plus 3 is 4. So we have found the combination that's going to work for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our original problem, x squared, but the middle term we're going to split. And this is where it gets its name. We're going to use these numbers with your x variable. So plus 1x plus 3x. So we took that middle term, which was a 4, and we split it up into a 1x and a 3x. It was a 4x. We split it up into a 1x and a 3x. And then we're going to take that last term plus 3. Now we've made a 4-term problem that we're going to split or cut right down the middle, just like we did on the front side. So now we're going to look at what divides into x to the second and x. That's going to be an x. So what we divide by goes on the outside of the parentheses. On the inside of the parentheses is our division. So x to the second divided by x is just x plus, and then 1x divided by x, the x's cancel. We just have 1 left. All right, then we look at our next 2 terms. What can we divide by? We have a 3x and a 3. So they both can divide by positive 3. So remember, I want to put my sign. I've divided by positive 3. Now I'm going to start my parentheses. Inside the parentheses, 3x divided by 3 leaves me with an x plus, and then 3 divided by 3 is 1. So you'll notice that I got the matching parentheses. The matching parentheses is one of my factors. And then I can mark it out. And my other factor is what I did not cancel out, which was the x plus the 3. And so those 2 factors would multiply together to give me what I started with up here. Those 2 factors would multiply together to give me x squared plus 4x plus 3. So now we're just going to practice this method. You have to watch positives and negatives. So let's go on with problem number 6. So first of all, you're going to identify your a, b, and c. A is going to be the number in front of x squared. It's a 1. B is going to be your number in front of x. It's negative 12. C is going to be your constant, 20. So we're going to look for what multiplies to a times c. Well, 1 times 20 is 20. So we want to think of numbers that multiply to 20, and at the same time add to give me my term b, which is negative 12. So I'm going to make a list, first of all, of what multiplies to 20. So 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 3 does not work, 4 and 5, and those are all my factors of 20. Now, in that list, something can be made to add to negative 12. But since it's negative, I've got to think about negatives. And the only way I can get a positive when I multiply is if I have two negatives. So the set that's going to work right here is going to be a -2 and a -10. When I multiply those together, I'll get positive 20. When I add them together, -2 and -10, I get my -12 that I want. So this is my pair that works, and I'll just need to put an X with it with each of them when I write down my next step. So I'm going to use X to the second power from my original problem. Then what I've circled here that I found in my table, except I have to put X's with them. So -2x and -10x. And then my last term from my original problem, plus 20. So now I'll draw that cut line, and I'm going to think about what can I divide out of x squared and -2x. And I can only divide out an x. So I'll put an x and I'll start a parentheses and then do my dividing. X squared divided by x is an x, because I have a 2 minus 1 on my exponent. And then minus 2x divided by x, my x's cancel. I have a -2. All right. Then I'll look to see what I can divide by for my last two. Now, with this number being negative, that tells me I'm going to divide by a negative. I have a 10 and a 20. I'm going to see if the 10 works. Can I divide both 10 and 20 by 10? And I can. So I'm going to divide by -10. I have to put my negative sign with my 10. I'll start my parentheses and do my dividing. And remember, I already know what I should get. I should get x minus 2. My 10s cancel. I do get x, and 20 divided by -10 is -2. So my first factor, or one of my factors, the order doesn't really matter, is x minus 2. I'm going to mark that out. And then my other factor is what's not marked out, x minus 10. So x minus 2 and x minus 10 will multiply together to give me my original problem of x squared minus 12x minus 20. All right, so I'm going to have to clear my screen to move down to the bottom two. Feel free to pause the video if you need to look at that some more. So I'm going to scroll down to problems 7 and 8, and just some more practice with your positives and negatives on number 7. I have a 1 for my A, 1x squared. I have a -1 for my B, -x, and then I have a -6 for the C. So as I look at my table, I have to get numbers that will multiply to 1 times -6. So I have to get numbers that multiply to -6. At the same time, they have to add to -1. I'm looking for those that will let me split a 3-term expression into a 4-term. Well, what multiplies to 6? I have 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Again, I don't have a long list. So something with positives and negatives could be made to add to -1. Well, if I think about it, I have to have a positive times a negative to get a negative. If my bigger number is negative, then when I add it, I'll have a negative answer. So I need to have 2 times -3 2 plus -3 for my combination. So again, let's think about how we go from here. We start with x squared from our original problem. Then we use our numbers that we thought of, but we put x's with them. So positive 2x minus 3x. And then we go back to our original problem and we use that last number minus 6. So we'll do the cut line. What can we divide by? We can divide both those terms only by an x. So I'm going to divide by an x, and that will be an x with the start of a parentheses. And when I do my dividing, x to the second divided by x, subtracting my exponents, I get x to the first plus, and then my next one, the x's cancel, and I just have a 2. Remember, we've said that if this number, this first one is after your cut line, if the first term is negative, then you're going to divide by a negative. And I can divide both of these by -3. I'll start my parentheses. Remember, I already know what I should get for an answer, and that should be x plus 2. So you're just verifying that that's what you get. And then x plus 2 is my common factor. That will be one of my answers. I'll mark that out. And my other answer is the factor I did not mark out, the x minus the 3. Okay, those two would multiply together to give me my original problem. All right, now number 8 looks a little different because I have a number other than 1 in front of the x squared. We're actually going to talk about that technique in your next lesson. So this one has something that we can do to take care of having a 2 in front of the x squared. You should always look to see, can you divide anything out of all 3 numbers? And we can. We can divide all 3 of these terms by a 2 before we ever start. So the 2 that we divided out has to go first, and then that would leave us with 1x squared. I'm just going to write x squared plus 39x minus 40. Okay, now, a lot of people forget that they took this 2 out. So what I'm going to recommend is that where you might be writing your answer, go ahead and put a 2, and that way you'll remember that you took this 2 out. But now we're pretty much going to ignore it. So I'm going to ignore this 2 from this point on. I've already put it in my answer. So that means that I'm going to concentrate on, I'm putting a blue box around it. I'm going to concentrate on that. That is now becoming my original problem. So that means the A is a 1. The B is a 39. And the C is a -40. Because I'm ignoring the 2 and I'm ignoring the original problem. So my AC, 1 times -40 is -40. And be sure you write that negative sign so you can see it. I know the box is small. Make sure you can see the negative sign. And then your B is 39. So now 40's got a little bit bigger list. Just start with 1. 1 times 40 is 40. Don't worry about your negative at the beginning. 2. 2 times 20 is 40. If you need to, you can use a calculator. 3, well, 3 doesn't work. You can't take anything times 3 to get 40. 4, well, that would be 4 times 10. 5 times 8. And then 6 doesn't work, 7 doesn't work, and then 8 we've already used. So we've got all of our factors. All right, now in this list, something has to be able to add to a positive 39. And really the only thing that looks close is the 1 and the 40. To get a negative 40, I would need one of them to be negative. To get my positive 39, I'm going to need the smaller one to be negative. So I'm going to use negative 1 times 40 and negative 1 plus 40. And that does give me multiplying to negative 40 and adding to 39. So now I'll move to, now remember we said we're ignoring the original problem. We're going to focus on where I drew this big box here. So I'm even going to switch colors. Right here is where we are. So we're going to go x squared and then use what we found in our table, minus 1x plus 40x, and then back up to our blue and green box here, minus 40. And we will draw that cut line so that we can separate our terms. We're going to look at what can we divide by. Well, we have an x squared and a minus 1x, so we can divide by x. So we'll divide by x, start a parentheses, and that's going to divide x squared divided by x is x, minus, and then 1x divided by x is a minus 1. All right, now I have a positive number, so I'm going to put a plus sign. And what can I divide by? Well, they're the same number, so I can divide by 40, by positive 40. And then I'll start my parentheses, and I already know what I want inside that parentheses. I want x minus 1. And if you check out your dividing, that's what you get. Now, I wrote my 2, and I guess I wrote it a little low. So I'm going to erase it and bring it up here in just a minute. I have my x minus 1 as my common factor now. I can take it out. And then I have what I didn't mark out, which was x plus 40. And then remember that 2 that I erased, that has to go in the very front. That's what I divided by at the beginning. So I have 2 times x minus 1 times x plus 40. If I would multiply all of that together, I would end up with my original problem of 2x squared plus 78x minus 80. So this is your lesson on the beginnings of factoring. This is an important skill that's going to be necessary all the way through the second semester. So please ask questions. Please do your homework. And if you are struggling with this, ask for help, because you'll need this skill to be successful in Algebra 2.